So, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. It's a pleasure to welcome you all from different regions in the world to our 2 days webinar. It's one webinar of our spring series that we organized. Today we will share more details about the topic eCOA explained, and we'll dive here more deeper with my colleagues here in a minute. I will give you also a quick overview about Signant Health, that you understand, what the company is and what's behind the company. Some housekeeping information. If you maybe go to the next slide, please. So if it would be nice if you could really participate in our poll sessions. When the questions are prompted, you will also see the information in the chat menu that you can get access to the link. If you have questions, please enter them in the Q&A panel. We will cover them at the end of each session and session of our presentation. Also at the end, we'll have some time to do that. If we can answer them right today, we will come back to you individually and answer them, of course. And there will also be a post-event survey where you can provide your feedback. And that would be really appreciated because we want to improve. We want to get always better. And if any information that you can share with us, that'd be highly appreciated. So today we have several people from our team here. They will introduce themselves in more detail. Just, we have David Weffels, our Chief Medical Officer, Bill Byram, our Principal for eCOA Science, and then Erwin Lucas, he's Director of Technical Solutions. I'll give you an overview about our solution. And I will start from my side. My name is Günther Martin here. I'm responsible in our business development team for the DACH region in Eastern Europe. I'm more than happy to host this session and also hosting, the other webinars. And I hope I can welcome you to the other webinars as well. And with no further ado, I will go directly into the introduction of Signant Health. So who's Signant Health? We are a company with over 2 decades of experience in the generation of high quality data. So what we're doing is providing technology really to combine the patient, the data, and the drug, so that you have really the best data of your clinical trial at the end. Our experience is strong in operations, and clinical, scientific, and regulatory experience is obvious, of course. And another pillar in our offering is really the combination, of the evidence generation, IP delivery, as well as study enablement. And this is then also the link to our solutions that we've also discussed today, and also in the next few webinars is really our solutions, are validated, and that's our technical solution team. Have a lot of experience gathered over the last decade, in supporting, flexible study designs, so really that you can really help you and find the right solution for your individual study. And last but not least, is I think a key component is really that you can integrate, converge, and unify, those solutions that we're offering. You can start with one, and you can bring other pieces together, and we'll see that in the next slide, I will show you. And you really are very flexible, and you can really combine them. Here, the area, what you can see here is, there's a lot of experience in what we gathered over the last 20 years. You see our experiences in all the therapeutic areas. We see an increase, in phase 1 and phase 2 trials at the moment. And, we have between 400 and 500 customers globally. And you see there's a lot of experience that we gathered in that area, and combining the technology solutions also with our scientific approach. And I will come to that in our next slide here, where I will give you an overview about the patient data journey. It really shows, the complete solution, that you can see that we're providing here. So you can see on the left-hand side, site initiation. That's, where we have, of course, solutions where we can help you. Oops. Someone pushed the button. Yeah, on the left-hand side, you can really, site initiation. That's where we have solutions for, of course, obviously. And in that area, so we have virtual site monitoring, which, is like Google Glasses that you can use, for, on-site remote inspection. It's just an area we can dive deep on it. Move over to, to the next area is really when you start your clinical trial, you need to consent. And so in that area, that's what we covered in our last in our last webinar. So we have a lot of experience gathered over the last few years, because different countries, they have different rules, and we'd be more than happy to help you to find the right, modality, for your particular trial here. And then we go over to medication, and what we see is a trend, direct to patient, of course, in that area. You can see in the middle area, what's happening at home, and then also on the side. So we can support that area, of course, and with our solutions. The key topic today is eCOA. That's the next pillar here, where we have different modalities, according to your study, and we are more than happy to support you in that, right at the beginning. And our team will talk about that today. And we see also sample collection that we can do, and more is the sensor and variables are getting embedded in clinical trials, and we can then combine that with our technology, of course, to gather the information that you have the best quality data in that area. Next thing is clinical ratings. This is really where our medical expertise comes into play, and that's what was represented today by our Chief Medical Officer Darby, and he will talk about that area, that you have really the right support in that area, and that we can really help you, that raters are trained the best and you could get the best outcome. Telemedicine, it's another area in our solution, is really in our solution offering. A lot of companies talking about it. We have done it since years, and we are more than happy to dive deeper on that area, but you can also participate in the next webinar, what's really dedicated to that area, to that telemedicine pillar. And last but not least, of course, the site closeout. On top of all of this, we have a global solution, because we're collecting a lot of data. You collect the data from different sources. It's really, we can help you, to do data aggregation and analytics, and we're more than happy to share more details in an individual conversation. But with no further ado, with this short introduction to our company and the solution offering, I would like to hand it over now to Bill Barham.
Thanks very much, Gunther. That's great. Next slide, please. So we've got a short presentation. We'll have time, of course, for questions and answers at the end. But please, any time throughout this presentation, please do ask any questions using that Q&A button that Gunther described. And we'll try to get to those during the webinar. And for those that we don't, we'll try to answer them afterwards as well. So we want to cover a few things. First, we'll just start about, talk about what is eCOA, and then the case for doing collection of this type of data electronically versus the paper-based approaches. My colleague Irvin will talk a little bit about how it works, to show a very short demonstration just for a few minutes. And then we'll talk about what makes a successful implementation of eCOA, electronic clinical outcome assessment. We'll then talk about a couple of industry hot topics and some changing landscape for oncology patient-reported outcomes. And then I'll hand over to Darby, who'll talk, as Gunther said, a little bit more about some of the scientific aspects and services that are applicable, perhaps more in the CNS area as well. So let me just move on to the next slide. And I think our first thing is really just to ask you a question. And we'd be interested in if you can answer this poll. You can see the poll information is at the top. So if you've got a mobile device or you've got another browser window available, you can go to this particular website, pollev.com/signant866, or you can use an SMS text message to signant866, and that will initiate it. So really what we're interested in finding out at this point is just how often you use eCOA, so electronic clinical outcome assessment, so electronic patient reported outcomes, that might be, in your study protocols. And this is a kind of an interesting picture. We've got, I was going to say we must have quite a small number responding so far. So 50-50 so far with seldom and often. Nobody's saying not at all. So that's an interesting and a good thing, perhaps, at least from the position of Signant Health. So just give that another minute or half a minute, perhaps, and just see if we get any more responses. I hope you're able to access the poll okay. Great. Okay. Well, maybe Oh, thank you very much, whoever that was. We'll perhaps leave it there. I think that's probably what we expect to see. We sort of, most people are in the often or seldom. I think if we were to ask the question, how often do you collect clinical outcome assessments, either on paper or electronic, we might have seen a bigger number in those top categories, I think. So let's just start out with talking about what is eCOA. If you go to the next slide, please. And a COA, so if we start, forget the E bit with the electronic piece, just think about a clinical outcome assessment, or a COA, and that's a measure that describes how a patient feels, functions, or survives. And that's the sort of the industry and the regulatory definition of a COA, a COA. And then within that umbrella term of a clinical outcome assessment, there are 4 different types of measures. There are patient-reported outcome measures, and that's the thing that we're going to talk about most in this particular webinar. And these are measures based on reports coming directly from a patient. Without any interpretation by an investigator, a doctor, a nurse, or a healthcare professional. So, for example, it might be a diary where you're asking about the symptoms that they're experiencing on a daily basis, perhaps an asthma diary, for example. That would be a patient-reported outcome. Observer-reported outcomes, or OBS-ROs, these are similar, but they're actually done by an observer on behalf of the patient. So an example might be, a parent providing information about a child who's probably unable to actually answer the questions themselves. And quite often these instruments are different because you can't always measure the same things as an observer as you can as a patient. So for example, we might talk about measuring pain, and as an adult, I can tell you how bad my pain is, maybe on a 0 to 10 scale. But for a child, or for a parent observing a child, you wouldn't perhaps ask them about pain, you might ask them about how irritable or how restless the child was. And you might ask slightly different things to get a handle on the impact of pain in that particular patient. Clinician-reported outcomes, or ClinROs, these are measures that come from a healthcare professional, basically observing or interviewing a patient and then applying their interpretation on the information they get back to rate the patient against a certain condition. So an example might be a depression rating scale, like a Hamilton or a Madras rating scale. And in those, you've got a number of different items that the investigator must rate the patient against, and they'll use a number of different questions and interview techniques to tease out the scores for those different items. And then finally, performance outcome measures. So these are tests that we might do on a patient, like a 6-minute walking test in clinic, that enable us to measure some objective measure of performance from the patient. So all of those are categorized as clinical outcome assessments. Go to the next one, please. And we're going to focus more on patient-reported outcomes. But let's think about, firstly, why do we want to do this electronically? If you go to the next slide. And I think, there's some good, some really good reasons for this. And I think one of them is around data quality. And if we think about a paper diary, there's an example on this slide of a typical diary that we might ask the patient to complete every day. And quite often these will be done on paper. And here's an example of a paper one, and you can see some of the issues that we have with the data. So in point 1 there, we've got missing data. We haven't had a date completed for that particular field. Item 2, ambiguous data. Did they mean moderate pain or severe pain? It's a little hard to tell. Conflicting data at number 3. Did you wake up in your night due to pain? No. How many times did you wake up in the night due to pain? 3 times. So there's a conflict there. And then finally, some extraneous data. Number 4, they've written something else on the thing which they're trying to be helpful. Look, I had a bad headache and a sore throat. That's perhaps adverse event data. This is extraneous data. We've got to decide as a data management team what we're going to do with that data now it's been written onto that diary. Doing this electronically, we've got data quality built in through logic and error checks to prevent things like missing or ambiguous or conflicting values. And of course, we can prevent extraneous data as well. If you go to the next slide. And here's a really nice example. This was done some time ago. This was back in 2002. It was published in the British Medical Journal. And in this study, they gave patients a paper diary, and it was inside a booklet, as you can see there. And inside the booklet, there was a microchip, which was a light-sensitive chip. So it meant that when the booklet was opened, you could record the fact that the book was open, and then when it was closed again, you could record the closing event. It enabled these research team to look at the actual completion behavior of the patients. And so when they got the paper diaries back in and they looked at how many records they got some 90% compliance. So 9 out of 10 days they had entries for the particular diary. However, when they looked at the opening and closing of the diary using the chip, they found actually only 11% of those records could have been completed on the days that they were supposed to have been completed on. And in fact, 32% of days had the binder wasn't open at all. And yet on those days, there were entries for 96% of the time. Even more staggeringly, 2 patients completed their diaries ahead of time. So they opened the book at the beginning of the study, they completed 21 days worth of data, closed the book, and then handed it in 3 weeks later. So what this does is it starts to question the integrity of the data that we collect when we provide paper diaries and paper instruments to patients to complete when they're unsupervised, like when they're at home. If you go to the next slide. And this is really part of the reason why in the PRO guidance that the FDA published back in 2009, they actually pick up on this particular effect. We call it the parking lot effect or the car parking effect, this idea that a patient might turn up at clinic with an empty diary and sit in the car park. I think I can't hand this in. This is embarrassing. So I'll fill in the last 2 weeks of data so I can hand it back and it looks good for the investigator. They want to make sure that there's something in place to ensure that patients are making entries at the times that they're supposed to, and not just before a clinic visit in that way. You go to the next slide. And of course, when we use an electronic solution, we can control for some of that. I think the other thing to think about when we think about data quality is eCOA compliance. And if we think about eCOA, when we talk about source records, we want them to follow eCOA. So they want them to be attributable, legible, contemporaneous, original, and accurate. And when we think about an electronic solution to collect those source records for patient-reported outcomes, they're attributable because you give somebody an app or a web solution and there's a password they need to enter to get into it. So we can attribute the entries to that user because they have a unique ID. They're legible because data collected electronically is implicitly legible. Contemporaneous or timely, so we can use time and date stamps to prove when somebody entered data, but we can also put windows around the times when they're able to enter data to make sure that we don't want them to enter data too far in the past. So, like the car parking effect, for example. Original, we probably wouldn't allow patients to change their data, so we make sure that we've got that. And accurate, I think the accuracy that we get from electronic solutions is greater than paper because of the fact we've got this sort of time stamping and we can prove that the data were collected in the right times. If you go to the next slide, please. I think just the final advantage of electronic is improved power of statistical tests. And so in my one of my textbooks, Byram and Tiplady, we have this particular case study which shows the reduction in the variance of the data that's collected using an electronic solution versus a paper solution. So this was actually an insomnia, a sleep diary, and they were measuring total sleep time and getting patients to estimate that. And on paper and electronic, you see on the left-hand side of that, those plots, we've got the paper, and on the right-hand side, the electronic. The means are not too far apart, they're pretty similar, but the spread of the data is much tighter for the electronic solution, and that leads to more powerful statistical tests. If you go to the next slide. So I'm going to hand over to Irvin, and Irvin's going to talk a little bit about how this works.
Thank you, Bill. So I just have a couple slides here on our eco solution here at Signant Health, its major benefits, and then I'll go into a live demo of our solution and show you from both the setup phase as well as from a site's perspective what they'll experience, and finally look at the patient experience and how they can provide this valuable eco data to the study. As a high-level overview of our SmartSignals eco solution, there's three major benefits that it offers. First and foremost is first-in-class tool for driving that data quality that Bill was just talking about. We do that through an advanced library functionality, allowing us to build out library versions of our assessments and quickly add them to studies, allowing a consistent and validated experience across multiple trials, whether they're author-owned instruments or assessments or diaries created in-house at a sponsor-specific type of solution. And we do this through a collaborative design tool that we built in-house, allowing multiple types of users to go in and start creating these types of studies very easily. And you'll see that within the demo later today. By building this design tool, we also have major benefits around accelerating that study build and timelines. We do that through our library functionality, as well as creating a multi-mode solution. What that means exactly is this designer solution allows us to build eCOA platform and deploy it anywhere we want without the need to specifically program in a solution for, let's say, an at-home data collection or a site-based data collection or BYOD, which is a hot topic within the industry. We don't have to think about that. We just have to program in a solution and deploy it in the manner that fits best for your study. And at the end, we want to build a leading user design and experience for both the sites and the patients to ease in capturing all this valuable data from them, whether it be the clinician report outcomes from the site users or the site-based assessments, eCOA, PRO data from the patients, whether they'll be at site or at home using their own personal device and the convenience in their own home to log into that application. Next slide. We have over 20 years of experience on deploying eco solutions here at Signant Health. We offer a wide range of solutions of both app and web-based solution, as well as BYOD provision models. So depending on your study's needs, we have the ability to support all of the different use cases. And these are meant for both home and visit-based data collection. And we combine this technology with our scientific, operational, regulatory expertise in-house. And we have a lot of those people on the call today to discuss those, like Bill Byron as well. So that being said, I'll go ahead and start doing the demo. I'll go ahead and start sharing my screen. So I'm going to be showing you first and foremost how we can easily design. In this particular demo today, I'll be showing our oncology type of trial design. So right now I'm showing you the screen for our designer tool. And it's a very visual tool, allowing us internally to visually and easily lay out all the different periods that might be part of a particular study, and then attach particular visits or create daily diaries with the drag of a section into those specific periods. So prior to the demo today, I've already created a screening period and now attaching a screening visit. And within that screening visit, I've defined two assessments to be completed, the QOQ-C30 and the QOQ-PAN26. What if I wanted to add a brand new study period? I can do that right here and type in what that period is, and then we'll call it treatment period. And then this on the left-hand side or right-hand side over here, we have some templates for certain activities that patient will need to complete. So if I have one already created here for cycle 1, day 1, and I've already put in the assessments needed to be completed during that cycle. We have the EQ5D, the SF12, as well as the QOQC30. And the way I added the assessments here is by going into the bottom right here, which is where our eCOA library is housed. And this is essentially managed within our solution, allowing us to control the specific versions and the functionality, and also allow easy deployment for those types of solutions. All I have to do is drag in a particular assessment and add it to the list of forms that that patient now needs to complete when that particular visit comes up. So if I wanted to add the HADS as part of that list, I can quickly drag that in and it'll be added as part of the visit. Once I finalize that visit, I can add it to the treatment phase, and now that will be available for that patient to complete. I can also add in another one, cycle 2, day 1, and we can alter what that specific visit will entail in terms of assessments to be completed by that patient. So we can have that variability for one visit to another, or keep it consistent depending on your protocol design. We can also add in daily diaries to be completed during that treatment period. It's been more and more common and within oncology studies to include a daily diary component. So we can add that to be available once the patient hits that treatment phase, to have a daily diary that they'll be asked every single day, appropriate reminders sent out to them through SMS or directly within the application. The last part of the demo with how we design the solution is the localization. So since everything is built centrally within our solution, we streamlined the localization process as well. So right now I only have English as part of the solution right here. But if I wanted to add other languages like German, French Canada, English Canada, and Italian, I can add that to the list of languages for this study. And everything is here color coded. Anything in green indicates that the translations have already been completed for that assessment and no further work needs to be done. So if we look at the column here for QOQC30, we see that entire row or column is green, indicating that any languages that I just added live during this demo are ready to go for that QOQC30. We are missing one for the PAN 26 English Canada, as well as for the EQ5D, we're missing that same language, but every other language you see here is already available, allowing me to publish this study, and it will be ready to be used by those patients within those countries and languages. No further work needed. Once we get to design, we'll go ahead and publish and make it available to sites. This is the management interface for the sites, allowing them to keep a track of what the patient has completed. So we have the same screening period that you saw within the design tool. You see everything is checked off, everything is green. And right now we're in the treatment phase of the study in cycle 1, day 1. And these are the assessments that are available for that patient to complete. And this section will update live as the patient is completing those assessments, whether it be at site or the patient or at home, in the convenience of using, let's say, their own personal BYOD solution, like their iPhone or Android phone. Once the patient logs in, those same assessments that you saw within that list are now made available. I'm just going to go through the first one here, the EQ5D, same features to allow, to ensure all the data is collected, eliminating those, the parking lot effect of the patient, doing it last minute. We remind them, we keep track of when they're completed to ensure they're completed in a timely manner. Also eliminating those extraneous data that might be on the margins of the paper that they'll later have to figure out what the patient actually meant when they typed that in or wrote that in. And once we save that answer, it's going to take me right next to the next assessment within that list, but I'm going to just exit out. And if I switch back to the site view, I can see the EQ5D has been checked off right away, indicating that that has been completed by the patient. And now the next one is the SF36 that can be completed. But this solution you saw within the application running on a standard Android smartphone, but this solution can operate within a web-based solution. If the patient happens to be using BYOD and they broke their device, the site can quickly activate a web-based solution, allowing the patient to continue where they left off. So if they log into that web solution, they'll be taken to the SF36 to be completed next, as part of it was designed by the protocol, really allowing us the flexibility to deploy anywhere we want in the most convenient manner for the patient, as also how it was designed as part of your protocol. That was a short demo for today. Thank you for your time. I'll hand it back to Bill to continue through the rest of the presentation.
Great, thanks, Irvin. That was super. Thank you very much. And I know we had a question that came in. It was almost you kind of predicted it and you answered it as we were going along. It was about the translations and whether that was in the library. So I think you covered that. So thank you. So let's just move on to think about what makes an implementation successful. And you know, if you go to the next slide, we think about this in terms of 4 S's. So you just, yeah, great. So 4 S's being solution, scale, service, and science. And I think we need all of those for a successful implementation. So when we think about solution, I think that Irvin has just showed us, you know, we want to make sure that we've got a solution that has all of the features that we need. We don't want to be shoehorning a protocol to fit a solution, but rather the other way around. And then scale, you know, we want to make sure that we've got the scale to support studies architecturally and operationally, and particularly as we think about the typical clinical trials that we see, a multinational study is going across the globe in all sorts of different countries, and the ability to be able to implement solutions that cover the globe is important. Service, you know, obviously high quality project management, but there's also other aspects to service that are more specific to eCOA that are important. So things like patient-facing help desk support in multiple languages, the ability to provide logistics. So to be able to ship smartphones around. So even in a study where we're asking patients to use their own smartphones, there might be a small percentage of patients who don't have them, and we're going to provide a phone for those patients. And scale management. So being able to navigate the licensing of the different scales and ensure we've got the correct versions of all the scales in play at any one point. So those are important aspects of service. And then science. I know Darby's going to touch on this at the end, but really, you know, just ensuring that things are done in a way to generate reliable and high quality evidence that you can make decisions based upon. So you go to the next slide, please. So I'm going to talk about just 2 hot topics that we hear a lot about when we think about electronic patient reported outcomes. So you go to the next slide. The first of those hot topics is what Irvin had talked about, bring your own device, BYOD. And there's a drive towards more bring your own device studies. We've seen a big uplift in the number that we're doing and supporting. And really, it's all around patient centricity as a driver, you know, making sure that we're making studies as accessible and convenient to participate in as possible. And doing things on your own phone instead of having to maintain a second handset, keep it charged and keep using it, is seen to be, in general, more convenient for patients. If you go to the next slide, please. But there are often 3 questions that we get asked a lot when we think about bring your own device. The first is around measurement comparability. And the important thing here is that when we use validated patient-reported outcome measures, like some of those quality of life instruments that Irvin had on his demo, they've been validated on paper, for paper use. And so when we change that into a different format, and maybe we have to squeeze it onto a screen and it's going to look and feel slightly different, the question is, have we affected the measurement properties of that instrument? And we need to be able to demonstrate that we haven't for that to be a valid implementation. Well, as you can see on this slide, there's a lot of work that's been done over time to accumulate a body of evidence that really does support that when we do things electronically, and if we implement them to best practices, there really isn't an issue with measurement comparability. If you go to the next slide, please. The second question we often get asked is, have regulators accepted data that have been collected using BYOD? And we often think that regulators might say that they haven't. Well, that's not the case. We certainly know with the COVID vaccine trials that we at Signant have performed that they were done with BYOD. And of course, they were given emergency use authorizations across the globe and actually full approvals in some markets, for example, FDA. And so we know that primary safety data collected using BYOD has been accepted by regulatory bodies. If you go to the next slide. And then the other area of question is really around data integrity and missing data and data security and privacy. And I think there are questions that the regulators sometimes ask around, can we assure that we're not going to have more missing data if we use BYOD compared to providing a dedicated phone to a patient? So things like connectivity, can we be more reliable? Can we have more reliable connectivity if we give patients a phone? What about if they lose or replace their devices? Is it quicker if we've got a device for them, or if they're using their own device, etc. Now, all of these issues actually are non-issues as far as we're concerned. We can provide advice on all of these points if needed to any sponsor considering BYOD. The other aspect is around data security and privacy, and the idea that could the data be more hackable or less secure if it's on an app that we provide to somebody to put on their own phone rather than on a lockdown phone that we might give to them as part of a clinical trial. And again, the security aspects of the app are identical whether they're on a provisioned phone that we provide or on the patient's own phone. It's all down to good app design. If you go to the next slide. So I think at Signant, we have significant experience with BYOD. We've done over 100 studies using our app, and we've done many, probably about half of those, about another 50 using web for BYOD for patients collecting data at home. We've done the industry's largest BYOD study in 44,000 patients. And we provide a lot of scientific research and work that helps drive the industry forward in the use of BYOD, and some of the examples are given here. The first one is just the evidence around BYOD and its measurement properties. The second example is looking at whether scrolling on a screen affects measurement properties. And the third example is the work we're doing with ISPOR to rewrite some of the guidances around what evidence you need to provide if you're doing a BYOD study to support the measurement equivalence to paper. If you go to the next slide. So the second hot topic I wanted to touch on is that around data changes. And it's an interesting topic because electronic patient-reported outcomes are electronic source data. And any source data, the investigator is the person responsible for, and they should control the source documents. And so when we put a system in place for a sponsor, are we taking some of that control of the data away from the site? And we need to enable the site to maintain that data and to confirm its accuracy. And part of that is that they may at times want to request changes to some of the data that have been entered by the patient. Now that gives us an interesting dilemma, because as we start to change data, we have to start to question the integrity of the data. If I went to a clinic and said, my pain 3 weeks ago really wasn't as bad as a 4, I probably should have scored it a 2 or a 3. That's going to really, question the integrity of that, because can I really remember that far back how bad my pain was? But if on the other hand, I said to the investigator, look, I looked at that scale, I thought 0 was the highest pain and 10 was the lowest, but I can see now it was the other way around. So I've kind of scored this incorrectly. Well, that might be a case to ensure that we do make a change to the data. So there are processes that we need to put in place to make sure that sites can do that, but they can do it under sensible circumstances. And again, it's something we can consult and talk some more about. You go to the next slide. So I think I want to finally touch before I hand over to Davi is just some of the changing landscape we see around patient-reported outcomes in oncology research. If you go to the next slide. And the recent draft guidance by FDA has been really interesting, and it talks about three things. It talks about the specificity of measures, it talks about the timing and frequency of measures, and it talks about the importance of collecting reasons for missing assessments. If we just drill into one or two of those, we just go to the next slide. So we talk about specificity. We've got some measures that are very specific and others that are less so. If we look at this example, this is a FACT-B. This is an instrument that's used quite a lot in cancer studies. And they have a subscale within that instrument called functional well-being. And if you just look at the questions here, you start to realize that they are kind of, it's hard to map them to exactly the same concept that's being measured. So if we look at, I'm able to work, okay, we get that. That's kind of part of functional well-being, perhaps. The next question now, my work is fulfilling. Well, that's really measuring something quite different, potentially. And then the fourth one down, I've accepted my illness. Again, it's hard to map those to a single domain that's of interest. And so therefore, this isn't desperately specific. It's not to say this instrument isn't useful. It is, but perhaps when we think about mapping it to the FDA guidelines, we might want to choose different subscales and adapt it slightly to make sure it fits their requirements. If you go to the next slide. And the other aspect is around the timing of assessments. And traditionally in oncology trials, we tend to collect patient-reported outcomes when the patient arrives at clinic just before they start a new cycle of treatment. And so we'd be asking them about side effect profiles and how they're feeling, etc., but asking them at the point at which they're actually feeling at their best, because the toxic effects of that last treatment cycle have started to wear off, and maybe they're now ready to take another cycle, so they're doing okay at that point. Well, what the FDA is saying is actually we want to understand the whole profile of side effects and treatment impact throughout the cycle. So we want you to measure this weekly rather than just simply at the start of a new cycle. And what this means is now we'll be collecting more data from the patient at home whilst they're recovering, rather than simply just collecting it at the site visit. If you go to the next slide. And I think, yeah, we've probably just covered these these implications. It's really talking now about changing the way we think about the types of measures that we pick for oncology studies, and also the frequency and the timing of how we make those measures. Again, something that our scientists here at Signant Health can provide advice and consulting on for any protocol. If you go to the next slide. And I think that's a good point at which to hand over to Davi, who's our Chief Medical Officer, to talk a little bit more about the role of the scientist in this.
Thank you, Bill. So, yeah, I think Bill already started demonstrating the point that at Signant, we believe that it's not only about the technology. You have to combine it with the science, because in the end, what you want to do is you want to gather high quality clinical evidence that will support your submission package. So if we go to the next slide, please. What you can see is that we have a large group of scientific health and clinical leadership team in various different therapeutic areas. You can, in addition to that, we have scientific advisory boards in neuroscience, in psychiatry, dermatology, rheumatology, gastroenterology, oncology, and then also infectious diseases and vaccines. And the main reason we believe this is important is to ensure that any data that you are going to collect is not only just high quality data, but it's the right type of data at the right time to collect that, to make sure you can create that specific evidence. So if we go to the next slide, I just want to show a bit on the application areas where we work at. And what you can see here is that we are involved right through from study design and which measurements you want to do from a strategic consulting point of view, to the implication of those and implication of best practices. And then we go right through during the study setup, in making sure that your rater training and qualification of raters are up to standard, and there's a central rating review. Once your study started, also to make sure that we can help you with finding the right patients and making sure your patients are eligible to the protocol. And this is extremely important in those cases where there are a subjective assessment from your investigator, not because we believe the investigators are not able to do it, but it's just to make sure that everyone is doing it as close as possible in accordance with your protocol. We then use methods like blinded data analytics during the trial to identify any variations from this standard measurement process that we want to do, and that we can also act on that. And then we learn from that. And the whole idea, again, is making sure that you can select the best sites, you can get the best quality data, and you can actually reduce the placebo response that you will see on all trials. If you go to the next slide, we work with the industry to ensure that we are part of the progress that we as an industry move forward. And I'll show you, and these are just some of the industry consortia that we work with. And I'll show you a couple of examples in my next slides and what we would do. So we can go to the next slide. In the Epilepsy Study Consortium, we are working to develop a new seizure diary that firstly captures seizures in a uniform way, that at least across all epilepsy studies, we all capture the data in the same way. And then secondly, finding innovative ways to make sure that it's easier for our patients to capture multiple seizures per day, for example. Next slide. And then we also do some paper to electronic versions. And this is just an example of a Parkinson's diary where we moved the paper version to the electronic version for all the reasons that Bill has pointed out in his previous slides. So these are just some of the consortium that we are working with. If we can go to the next slide. So, like I said in the beginning, we believe that what you want to do in any trial is that you want to drive high quality clinical evidence. And to do that, you need to capture high quality data. And we define high quality data as good data collection. So the process of collecting data, and then also making sure that you collect good data as well. So, and I think throughout this talk, you've seen several examples like the FDA talking about the oncology examples, where you want to make sure that you not only capture the data when your patients are feeling their best, but you can also capture it throughout their experience with the medication. These are just ways to think about it. So when we think about it, intelligent eCOA versus paper, just making sure there's training modules in the eCOA edit checks for the patients to make sure that the data makes sense. And then also a navigation of branching logic to optimize the experience for the patients. Our experts are involved in rater training, not just training the raters, but then also certifying certification examinations, ongoing centralized review, and then any mitigation that's required during the trial where you start seeing more than expected variation of the raters. We use blinded data analytics, and we use this. These are specific clinical quality indicators that we choose with you on your trial that will be specific to that trial, where we can do look at and do routine analysis on this and reporting on this, and then mitigate according to that data as the study happens. We also use that data to inform any of our future study designs, and then also use it to look at site selection to actually make sure that the sites that you choose are the best quality sites out there. And then I've spoken about placebo response mitigation and making sure that we can reduce the augmentation of placebo response. I think the next slide is my final slide. And this is just an example where we've been using blinded data analytics. And what we did here is we looked at the endpoint reliability assessments when you do an assessment face-to-face versus via telemedicine. And we looked at in different regions as well. And what you can see on the slide is that the standard variations between in-person visits and remote visits are within acceptable ranges, just showing that it is perfectly possible to do this type of assessment via telemedicine. Next slide. I think that's it. I'm handing back to Gunther.
Perfect. Thank you, Davi. Really appreciate it. So yeah, so we are almost at the end of the session. So we have a couple more minutes for questions, and we got several of them. We cannot cover all of them, but we come back individually. There was the first one was also, if the recording will be available. Of course, our marketing will handle it. We'll send it out to you when it's finalized, so that you can review this session again. Then let me pick this one. So Bill, so that question, if we are using an app to collect data from patients, can we also use the app for other purposes, like site visit reminders? Could you?
Yeah. So I think, again, as we get more decentralized, we're going to want to do more things with the app that we provide to the patient. And unlike, I guess, the experience we've inflicted on sites in terms of giving them lots of different pieces of technology, we need the patient to really have a very simple experience. So a single app is really what we're looking for, single app experience. So yeah, it's very possible to build other functionality in, and we quite often will build in engagement functionality. So we'll provide study information, treatment information. We'll provide an up-to-date visit schedule for the patients. They know when they're going to clinic next. And when they click into that, they can find out what will happen at the visit to make sure that they're prepared and able to, they know what to expect. We can also provide video visits, so the telemedicine piece that Davi talked about. We can enable patients and doctors to be able to talk to each other, again, using that same app that we give to the patient. So yeah, absolutely. And I think we're going to see more of that moving forward.
Perfect. Thank you, Bill. That's great. Thank you for the answer. And then the last one is, when would you use a web solution versus an app to collect patient-reported outcomes data?
Yeah, no, that was a good question. I saw that come in. And look, one of the things we often do with sponsors is we'll sit down and we'll talk about the optimal modality to use in a particular clinical trial. And when we think about app and web, think about two things. App is available for offline entry. So you download an app and you can access your diary even when you don't have a connection to the internet. Whereas a web diary will only work when connected. So that's kind of one of the things to think about. Am I going to be working in geographies where I might be worried about patients having reliable connections at all times? If I am, I'll certainly be wanting to use an app rather than the web. I think the other area is around the frequency of collection. So if it's a very infrequent, so maybe we're collecting something once every 3 months, maybe a web solution is better. We send them an email reminder or an SMS reminder, they click on a link, they go to the web page, they enter their data, rather than asking them to have an app on their phone for a number of years where they're only using it once every few months. That seems like something that the patients might easily just delete that app. So those are two considerations, but again, love to talk more about the optimal way to design studies. One of the things that the app gives us is it gives us much more control over the interface we provide to the patient, exactly how it looks. Whereas with web, the way things get rendered on web browsers, we as developers have less control over. And so there's lots of things to think about when we decide between app and web. And I think as the person who asked the question, they see, they understand web as a backup solution. And that's certainly true. But we also do see web being used as the primary way to collect data. We've done a number of home diaries for patients using web, which have been very successful as well as that. So again, something just to talk to us about and for us to help you make a decision over.
Okay, perfect, Bill. So I really appreciate that. And yeah, with that, I think there are a couple, several more, but we will come back to everybody individually. Yeah. So those questions absolutely will not have anything left open. Of course, we will come back to you. With that, thank you very much, for your participation in the 2 days webinar. Thank you to my colleagues, who presented, a lot of information, great value to the audience here. And last but not least, on the final slide here, I really encourage you to sign up also for our upcoming webinars. In June 1st, we talk about decentralized clinical trials in the real world. That's a very, very important topic because the market is talking about this. We want to bring this here in the real world. And last but not least, of course, randomization, clinical trial supply management. That's a journey of a study what we will present on June the 29th. And again, I would be more than happy to welcome everybody, for those webinars as well. With that, I wish you a good rest of the afternoon, rest of the week, and please stay safe and healthy. Thank you very much, and goodbye.
Bye.
Goodbye.